I wasn't supposed to be there. That's what made it all the more twisted. If I'd stuck to my usual routine, I would have been none the wiser. But as fate would have it, I decided to leave work early that evening, planning to surprise Sam with a nice dinner. Instead, I got the surprise of my life. The gym was mostly empty when I walked in, that familiar scent of rubber mats and disinfectant hanging in the air. I hadn't been here in weeks, work had kept me busy. But there she was, my wife. Sam, in the corner of the room, laughing softly. And right next to her was Trevor, our fitness instructor, his hands a little too close, his smile a little too familiar. I froze. It wasn't the kind of scene you immediately process. Your brain fights it and tries to twist it into something less awful. Maybe it's innocent, I thought. Maybe I'm overreacting. But then I saw the way his hand grazed her arm, the way she leaned in, her face lit up like she was flirting with some guy at a bar. Not her personal trainer. Not while married to me. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails dig into my palms. I could have walked over right then and ended it, screamed at both of them until they shriveled up from the shame. But something darker rose inside me. No, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a simple argument. If they wanted to play games, I'd make sure I set the rules. I turned and left without a word. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts spiraled between rage and cold calculation. I could confront Sam, of course, but where would that get me? An argument, maybe some tears, promises that it meant nothing. No, I needed something bigger. Something that would leave a mark on both of them. By the time I parked the car in the driveway, I had the whole thing mapped out in my head. I knew exactly how I was going to make them pay. And it wasn't going to be pretty. Sam walked through the front door 2 hours later, all smiles and fake cheer. She didn't suspect a thing. "Hey babe, how was work?" she asked, leaning in for a kiss. I gave her a half-hearted peck, barely meeting her eyes. If she noticed the distance, she didn't show it. The plan was set in motion now. I wasn't about to tip my hand. She babbled about her workout, something about a new routine Trevor had suggested. I listened just enough to file it away for later. Trevor. It always came back to him. He was the key to all of this, and soon enough, he was going to regret ever laying a hand on my wife. As the days passed, I prepared for the showdown. I spoke with the gym's management, planting seeds of doubt about Trevor's professionalism. A few carefully crafted complaints, and a couple of well-timed comments, and I could tell they were already starting to second-guess him. It was only a matter of time. I just needed to wait for the perfect moment. That moment came the following week. Sam had another session with Trevor, and I knew exactly when and where it was happening. I told her I'd be working late again. She didn't seem to care. Too wrapped up in her own world to notice the storm brewing right under her nose. I walked into the gym right on schedule, my heart pounding in my chest. There they were, just like before, lost in their little bubble. Trevor was adjusting her form, his hands lingering just a bit too long. My blood boiled, but I kept my face calm. I crossed the gym floor, not making a sound until I was right behind them. Trevor. He spun around, eyes wide with surprise. Sam's face drained of color as she took a step back. She knew, even before I said a word, that her little secret was out. "You think I don't know what's going on?" My voice was low but sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Trevor stammered something, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. "You're not just unprofessional," I continued, my voice rising, "you're a damn fraud. You use your clients, don't you? Pretending to care about their health, when really you're just interested in getting close. Using them for your own twisted games." The room was starting to go quiet. People were stopping mid-rep, turning their heads. I could feel eyes on us now, and that's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't just confronting him. I was putting on a show. Trevor tried to say something, but the damage was done. Sam stood there, frozen, as the weight of the situation crashed down on her. She was trapped. There was no escape from the looks of judgment, no easy way out. "I'm not going to let you keep doing this," I said, making sure the whole room could hear me. "You don't belong here." Behind me, I saw the gym manager approaching, his face grim. He'd heard enough. Trevor was done. I turned and walked out without another word. I didn't need to stay to watch the aftermath. I already knew how it would end. Sam was still standing there, humiliated, in front of everyone. And Trevor, well, he was just a bad memory now. As for me, I walked away feeling lighter than I had in months. The house was quiet when I got home. It felt too quiet, like the silence itself was holding its breath, waiting for the explosion that was sure to come. I kicked off my shoes by the door, knowing Sam wouldn't be far behind me. She'd need to confront me, to say something, anything to claw her way out of the pit I'd just thrown her into. But I wasn't interested in that conversation. Not tonight. I poured myself a drink, the ice clinking in the glass like the last bit of calm before the storm. I sat at the kitchen counter, letting the whiskey burn down my throat as I waited for her to show up. I didn't have to wait long. The door swung open, and there she was. Her face was flushed, her breathing heavy, a mix of rage and shame twisted together in that one look. She stood there for a moment, staring at me like she couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. "How could you do that?" Her voice cracked a mix of anger and desperation. "How could you humiliate me like that? In front of everyone?" I didn't look at her. I just took another sip of my drink. "Humiliate you?" I repeated slowly, letting the words roll off my tongue like they were some kind of joke. "You did that all on your own, Sam." I just gave them the full picture. Her face hardened, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This was between us," she spat, taking a step closer. "You didn't have to." "Between us?" I cut her off, my voice rising for the first time. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor as I moved. "You think this is just between us, Sam? You dragged someone else into this the moment you decided to start sneaking around with Trevor. You made it everyone's problem." Her eyes flashed with something, guilt, maybe, but it was too late for that. She looked away, crossing her arms defensively. "It wasn't like that." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Sure it wasn't. Just a harmless fling with the guy who gets paid to tell you how to do squats. Do you even hear yourself?" She didn't say anything. What could she say? There was no excuse that would fix this, no explanation that would make it better. She knew it, and so did I. "I trusted you, Sam," I said, my voice quieter now, more controlled. "I thought we had something real. And you threw it away for what? Some trainer who doesn't even have a future." Her eyes flicked back to mine, but I didn't stop. "I watched you today, you know. I saw how you looked at him. I saw how he touched you." My hands clenched into fists at the memory, the anger bubbling up again. "You let him get that close. You let him cross that line." She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I don't care what your excuses are. I don't care how you try to spin this. You've ruined everything, Sam. And it's not just me you've hurt, it's yourself too. Did you see how they looked at you? Everyone in that gym? They know now. They all know." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might break down right there in the middle of the kitchen. But instead, she stood straighter, pulling herself together with whatever strength she had left. "You're not perfect, Harry," she shot back, her voice trembling but steady. "You're not some saint. You've been so distant, so cold for months. I felt alone. What was I supposed to do?" I scoffed. "So it's my fault, then? That's what you're saying?" She shook her head, her eyes wet but defiant. "I'm saying we both messed up. But what you did today, that was cruel." "Cruel?" I slammed the glass down on the counter, making her flinch. "You want to talk about cruelty? You cheated on me. You broke our marriage. Don't act like you're the victim here." The room fell silent again. Sam wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming, silent and unstoppable. I should have felt something at that moment. Maybe some small piece of sympathy, of sorrow for what we had lost. But all I felt was emptiness. She finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her question settling in. What happens now? It was a good question. Part of me had already made up my mind the second I saw her with Trevor. The other part, the part that once loved her, the part that wanted to believe we could fix this, was already dead. "We're done, Sam," I said, the words final, cold. "There's no coming back from this." She nodded slowly as if she'd known it all along. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the wreckage of what we used to be. The whiskey in the glass was still, the ice melting. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door where she had just been. There was no satisfaction, no relief. Just a sense of finality. We were over. And now, all that was left was to pick up the pieces. The days after that night moved in slow motion. The house felt hollow, like every piece of it had absorbed the fight, the betrayal, and now it was nothing more than a reminder of what had been destroyed. Sam didn't pack her things right away. She stayed, lurking around like a ghost, tiptoeing through the wreckage of our marriage as if hoping we'd somehow find a way to glue it all back together. But I knew better. There was no fixing this. We were broken beyond repair. Every morning, I'd leave for work before she woke up. Every night, I'd return long after she'd gone to bed, avoiding any interaction, any conversation that might drag me back into the mess. I wasn't ready for another fight. I wasn't ready for any of it. She tried, though. A few times she left notes on the counter, small, desperate attempts at reconciliation. "We need to talk," one said. "I'm sorry," another read. Written in her neat, careful handwriting. But I ignored them all, throwing each note into the trash without a second thought. What was left to say? One night, after a particularly long day at work, I walked into the house, expecting the same deafening silence. But this time, Sam was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. Her eyes were red and puffy like she'd been crying for hours. Her suitcase was next to her, packed. "I'm leaving," she said softly, barely above a whisper. I stood in the doorway, not saying a word. I'd been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like I thought it would. I expected some kind of relief, maybe even satisfaction. But there was none of that. Just more of the same numbness that had been growing inside me for days. "Okay," I finally said, my voice flat, emotionless. She blinked as if she hadn't expected me to be so indifferent. "That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Sam?" I asked, stepping farther into the room. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass of water. "I know I hurt you," she said after a long pause. "I know what I did was wrong. But we used to be good, Harry. We used to love each other." "We did," I agreed. "But that's over now. You ended it." Her face crumpled again, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, not quite regret, but close. It was strange seeing her like this, so broken, so lost. This wasn't the woman I married. The Sam I knew was confident, strong, and always in control. But here she was, falling apart in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, forcing herself to hold it together. "Do you think we'll ever, I don't know, be okay again? As people, I mean. Not together, but just, okay." I thought about it for a moment and then shook my head. "I don't know, Sam. Maybe, but not right now." She nodded, accepting the answer even though it wasn't what she wanted to hear. "I'm staying at a hotel for now," she said, standing up slowly. "I'll figure out what to do next. I won't be around to bother you." "You're not bothering me," I said quietly, though part of me knew that wasn't true. Her presence had been suffocating. "But I think it's for the best." She walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "I hope one day you can forgive me, Harry." I didn't answer. She opened the door, the suitcase wheels scraping softly against the floor as she pulled it out behind her. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time after the door clicked shut, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. I should have felt free, unburdened. But all I felt was the weight of everything that had happened, pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Sam hadn't come back, and for once, the silence wasn't oppressive, it was just empty. I went about my routine like a robot, going to work, coming home, eating dinner alone in front of the TV. It was easier to zone out, to let the monotony numb the lingering pain. One afternoon, I found myself walking past the gym, the scene of the crime. I hadn't set foot in that place since the day I'd blown up Trevor's life and publicly shamed Sam. I could only imagine how the gossip had spread after I left. People must have whispered about it for days, weeks even. I was sure both Trevor and Sam had been the talk of every conversation in that gym. I hesitated outside, wondering if I should go in. Part of me wanted to see if Trevor was still there, if he'd somehow managed to weasel his way back into his job. I doubted it. He'd been on thin ice even before my little performance. But I wanted to know for sure. Instead, I kept walking. What was the point? I'd gotten what I wanted. Trevor was gone, Sam was humiliated, and now I had my life back. But was it really what I wanted? Was this hollow victory enough? I wasn't so sure anymore. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in front of me. It felt like I'd come full circle, back to where this whole mess started. Only now, there was no anger left, no burning desire for revenge. Just exhaustion, just emptiness. I thought about Sam, about everything we'd been through. It wasn't just the affair that had ruined us. That was just the final blow. The truth was, we'd been drifting apart for a long time, years even. We'd stopped talking, stopped trying. We both let it happen. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as I sat there in the quiet of our empty house, I realized that the real tragedy wasn't just her betrayal. It was that we'd let our marriage die long before that. And now, I was finally ready to bury it. The house was emptier than ever after Sam left. The absence was sharp, but strangely, it also felt like a relief. There was no more tension hanging in the air, no more awkward silences between us. For the first time in what felt like years, I was truly alone, and I could feel it in every corner of the house. The days blended together. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. I wasn't sure how much time had passed since Sam had walked out with her suitcase. A week? 2? I barely kept track. The routine was comforting in its own way, numbing me to everything that had happened. But at night, the thoughts came back. I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying it all in my mind. Sam's betrayal. The way Trevor had touched her. The way she looked at him. It was like a poison, seeping into every corner of my thoughts, refusing to leave me alone. I tried drowning it out with work, with whiskey, with anything that would quiet the storm in my head. But nothing worked. One night, as I lay there in the dark, I realized something. This anger, this hurt, it wasn't just about Sam. It was about everything we'd lost. The years we'd spent building a life together, only to let it crumble. I wasn't just mourning the affair. I was mourning the life we'd had, the future we'd planned, the person I thought she was. And as much as I hated her for what she did, I hated myself too. I'd seen the signs. I knew something was wrong long before she ever touched Trevor. But I did nothing. I let the distance grow between us, convincing myself that it was normal, that it would pass. But it didn't. It festered. I stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could keep blaming her, keep feeding the anger. But it wasn't going to fix anything. It wasn't going to bring back what we'd lost. I needed to let go, to stop clinging to the past, because the truth was, it had been over long before the affair. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to move on. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The house was still quiet, still empty, but it didn't feel quite so oppressive. I got up, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, letting the sunlight stream through the windows. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't gone, not completely. But it was lighter, manageable. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages, seeing Sam's name there, her last text still unopened from weeks ago. We hadn't spoken since she left. No calls, no follow-ups, just silence. I clicked on the message, hesitating for a moment before opening it. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're okay." That was it. Simple, but sincere. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to say back, or if I should say anything at all. But I knew what I needed to do. I typed a response, my fingers hovering over the keyboard before I hit send. "I'm okay. Take care of yourself." It wasn't much, but it was enough. And just like that, I felt a little bit lighter. The days following my text to Sam were different. Not drastically so. It wasn't like the sun suddenly shone brighter or the air felt fresher. But something had shifted. I wasn't thinking about her constantly anymore. The weight I'd been carrying around for months had finally started to lift, even if just a little. I had made peace with the fact that we were done. No more anger, no more resentment. Just acceptance. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one we got. And now, it was time to figure out what came next. One afternoon, I decided to go back to the gym. I hadn't stepped foot inside since the day I confronted Trevor and turned Sam's life upside down in front of everyone. Part of me wondered if anyone would recognize me, if they'd look at me like I was some kind of ticking time bomb, ready to explode again. But I wasn't that guy anymore. At least, I didn't want to be. When I walked in, the familiar sounds of weights clanking and treadmills humming greeted me. The place hadn't changed. I, on the other hand, felt different. More detached. I was just another person here now, not the guy who caused a scene. No one stared. No one whispered. It was almost disappointing in a strange way. I headed toward the weights, starting with the basics. Bench presses, squats, deadlifts. The motions felt good, grounding me in something physical, something I could control. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Sam, about Trevor, about any of it. Just the weight in my hands, the burn in my muscles. After about an hour, I wiped the sweat from my forehead and grabbed my water bottle, glancing around the gym. A few familiar faces, but no one I really knew. No Trevor. Of course. He was long gone, his career probably in ruins after what I did. Part of me still felt a little guilty about that, but then again, he made his choices. As I was about to leave, someone caught my eye. A woman, standing by the free weights, adjusting her form. She was focused and confident, but not in an overly showy way. There was something grounded about her, something that made me pause. I debated for a moment, then walked over. Need a spot? She glanced up at me, her expression neutral. Then nodded. Sure. I helped her through a few reps, nothing too intense, just enough to make conversation. Her name was Jessica. She had recently moved to the area, trying to find a new routine. We talked a bit, mostly about the gym, nothing too personal. But it was easy, casual. And for the first time since everything went down with Sam, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of interest. It wasn't love, not by a long shot. But it was something that reminded me life moves on. That there are still people out there, still connections to be made. As I left the gym that day, I felt hopeful. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there were parts of my life I wasn't sure how to rebuild. But I wasn't stuck anymore. I wasn't drowning in the wreckage of my marriage, consumed by revenge, or wallowing in self-pity. I was moving forward. Slowly, yes, but forward all the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days began to blur together again, but this time it wasn't because of the emptiness. It was the opposite. Life had taken on a steady rhythm, one that felt natural, almost comfortable. Work, gym, the occasional drink with friends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I was starting to find a new normal. Jessica and I continued to see each other at the gym. We didn't exchange numbers or make plans, we just kept bumping into each other. A few times a week, we'd work out together, talking casually between sets. It was easy with her, no pressure, no expectations. It felt good to have someone to talk to who wasn't tied to everything that had happened. She didn't know about Sam, about Trevor, about the drama that had consumed my life. With her, I could just be Harry. One day, after a particularly tough workout, we decided to grab a coffee. We sat in a small cafe across the street from the gym, sipping our drinks and watching the people pass by outside. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in months, I found myself laughing. Not just the polite, empty kind of laugh, but real laughter, the kind that makes you forget everything for a moment. You know, Jessica said, leaning back in her chair, I was kind of surprised you came over to help me that day. Most guys don't offer without expecting something. I smiled, shaking my head. Honestly, I was just trying to get back into the swing of things. Been a rough few months. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Yeah? Well, whatever it was, I'm glad you did. I needed a spotter, and you seemed like the least intimidating person in the room. I laughed. Least intimidating? I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted. Definitely flattered, she teased, taking another sip of her coffee. There was a moment of silence, comfortable, but I could feel something shifting. It wasn't just a casual friendship anymore, there was something more building between us. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I wasn't afraid of it either. Look, she said, her tone turning a bit more serious. I don't know what you've been through, but I can tell you're. I don't know, working through something. I've been there, too. So, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here. I nodded, appreciating the offer. Thanks. I might take you up on that someday. We finished our coffee, and as we left the cafe, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted again. It was subtle, but it was there, the beginning of something new. Maybe it was just a friendship, maybe more. But it felt good to be moving forward. As I walked back to my car, I realized I wasn't thinking about Sam for the first time in months. I wasn't dwelling on what had happened, on the betrayal, on the wreckage. I was thinking about the future, about what came next. And for the first time, that future didn't seem so bleak. Just when I thought I'd left it all behind, the past came knocking. It had been a few months since Sam left. Life was quiet and routine. Jessica and I had grown closer, though we were taking things slow. I didn't want to rush into anything, not after what I'd been through. But the ease of our connection made it hard to resist the pull. She understood me in a way I hadn't expected, and she didn't push for more than I was ready to give. Then, one evening, just as I was settling in for the night, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or a text from a friend. But it wasn't that. It was Sam. I stared at her name, the familiar pang of something, anger, regret, maybe both, tugging at me. I hadn't heard from her since she left that night with her suitcase. We hadn't spoken since I sent that brief text weeks ago. Now, seeing her name again stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. The message was short and to the point. "Can we talk?" I sat there for a long moment, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue with the life I'd built without her. But another part of me, the part that still had unfinished business, knew I had to face her eventually. If I didn't, the past would keep lurking in the shadows, waiting to drag me back down. After a few minutes, I typed a response. "Sure, when?" She replied quickly. "Tomorrow? Same place?" "The same place. Our house. The house we had built together, the place that had become a battlefield." I wasn't sure if I was ready to walk back into that space, but if this was going to end for good, I needed closure. The next day, I drove to the house. It looked the same as it had when I left, same front yard, same driveway, but it felt different. Like it didn't belong to me anymore. As I pulled in, I saw Sam's car already parked outside. My stomach tightened, but I pushed the feeling down. I had to get through this. I stepped inside, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, the same place she'd been the last time we spoke. She looked different, thinner, tired. There was no makeup, no attempt to mask the reality of the situation. Just Sam, raw and real. "Hey," she said softly, standing as I walked in. "Hey," I replied, my voice neutral. I wasn't sure how to feel. We sat down across from each other, the silence hanging heavy between us. "I know I have no right to ask this," she started, her eyes downcast. "But I needed to see you. I need to apologize. I've spent the last few months thinking about everything, and I can't live with how I left things." I didn't say anything, just let her speak. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was wrong, Harry. About everything. The affair, how I treated you, how I let things get so bad between us. It wasn't just the affair that broke us, we both know that. But I should have fought for us instead of giving up. I should have been better." Her words hit me hard, but they didn't hurt the way they once would have. I had already come to the same conclusion. This wasn't about justifying what she'd done or looking for redemption. It was about closure, for both of us. "I know," I said finally, my voice steady. "We both messed up, Sam. It wasn't just you. I stopped trying too. But we can't change what happened." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I needed to say it. I needed you to know I regret it. All of it." There was a long pause, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This was it. The conversation I didn't realize I needed. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, my voice softer than before. "But I've moved on, Sam. We both need to." She smiled weakly, wiping her eyes. "I know. I'm glad you're doing okay." We sat there for a few more minutes, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. There was no need for anger anymore, no need for blame. We had both made mistakes. And now, we were finally ready to let go. As I stood to leave, Sam looked up at me one last time. "Take care of yourself, Harry." "You too," I replied. And with that, I walked out of the house, closing the door on that chapter of my life for good. It was time to start living again. Leaving the house for the last time felt surreal. It wasn't just a building to me, it was the place where I had built dreams. And where I watched them shatter. But as I drove away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Sam and I had said everything that needed to be said. There was no going back, no room for regret. The past was behind me. Jessica and I continued our slow, steady connection. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, it was something quieter, more deliberate. We spent time together, mostly in the gym or over coffee. She never pried into my past, and I appreciated that. When I was ready, I'd tell her. For now, I just wanted to enjoy the simplicity of it. One evening, after a light workout, she invited me to dinner at her place. It was the first time we'd moved our connection outside of public spaces, and I felt a mix of anticipation and caution. I wanted to be with her, but I didn't want to rush into anything either. When I arrived at her apartment, she greeted me with a smile, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair tied back. It was different from the gym, more intimate somehow. I liked seeing her in this new light, relaxed and comfortable. We talked over dinner, the conversation flowing easily as usual. She told me about her job. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, and how she'd moved to the area after leaving a long-term relationship behind. That revelation caught my attention, but I didn't press her for details. I knew how hard it could be to share the pain of a broken relationship. "Why'd you leave?" I asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. She paused, stirring her pasta thoughtfully. "We were just done. I think we both knew it for a long time, but we tried to hold on. When I finally let go, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I realized we'd been holding each other back." I nodded. It was a familiar story, one I could relate to all too well. "Sounds like you made the right choice." "Yeah," she said, looking at me with a soft smile. "It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing." After dinner, we sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking about lighter things, movies, travel, anything but the past. As the evening wore on, the space between us seemed to shrink. There was a tension in the air, not uncomfortable, but charged with possibility. At some point, Jessica leaned closer, her hand resting on mine. "Harry," she said softly, "I like where this is going, but I don't want to rush anything." I nodded, feeling the same way. "Me neither. Let's just take it one step at a time." She smiled, relieved. We didn't need to label whatever this was or jump into something we weren't ready for. We both had our baggage, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could see a future with someone again. The night ended with a kiss, soft, slow, and full of promise. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't just about Jessica. It was about letting myself believe in the possibility of happiness again. As the weeks passed, things with Jessica deepened, but we kept it slow. It was refreshing to be with someone who didn't push or demand. She was patient and understanding in ways I hadn't expected. I'd spent so long wrapped up in the mess of my marriage that I'd almost forgotten what it was like to feel this kind of calm. There were no fights, no unspoken tensions, no secrets. It felt honest and simple. Yet, the specter of my past was always lingering, waiting to rear its head. One afternoon, after a long week at work, I found myself back at the house. Not inside, but parked out front. I wasn't sure why I was there. I had no business being there anymore. Sam and I had said everything we needed to say, and I had no desire to rehash the past. But something about the place drew me back. It wasn't just the memories, it was the fact that I still hadn't fully let go. I sat there in the car, staring at the front door, replaying the years Sam and I had spent building a life together. The dinners, the late-night talks, the arguments, the way she used to smile at me before everything went wrong. I had come to terms with the affair, but the deeper wounds, the ones that came from years of drifting apart, were harder to heal. I hadn't failed just because of the affair. I had failed long before that. The marriage had been crumbling, and I had been too blind to see it. Sam's betrayal was just the final crack that brought the whole thing crashing down. As I sat there, I realized I was holding onto more than just memories. I was holding onto guilt and regret, all the things I wished I could have done differently. I couldn't change the past, but I could change how I moved forward. I thought of Jessica, of how easy it was to be with her. No expectations, no baggage weighing us down. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something new, something that had the potential to grow into more. I started the car and drove away from the house, knowing that it was the last time I'd ever come back here. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a place where my past lived, and I was done living in the past. That evening, I went to Jessica's. We didn't have plans, but I felt like I needed to see her, to ground myself in the present. When I arrived, she opened the door with a smile, surprised but happy to see me. "I wasn't expecting you," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know," I replied, "but I wanted to be here." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. We spent the evening together, watching a movie, talking about nothing important, just enjoying each other's company. As the night wore on, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Sam. I wasn't thinking about the past at all. I was just here, in the moment, with Jessica. And that felt like a step forward. Later that night, as we lay together on the couch, Jessica resting her head on my shoulder, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the end of the journey, far from it. But it was the beginning of something new. Something better. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Things with Jessica continued to evolve, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was finally moving in a positive direction. Our connection had grown deeper, but it wasn't just about the romance. We were building something solid, something based on trust, and that felt good after everything I had been through. Work was steady, my routine was stable, and most importantly, I was no longer haunted by the ghosts of my past. At least, that's what I thought. One evening, as I was winding down after a long day at the office, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was an unfamiliar number, but something about it made me pause. I considered ignoring it. After all, it could just be a telemarketer or a wrong number. But something told me to pick up. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard a voice I hadn't expected. Harry, it's Trevor. My stomach twisted at the sound of his name. Trevor, the man who had been at the center of my life's unraveling. Sam's fitness instructor. The man I had publicly humiliated. The man who had ruined my marriage, or at least, played a big part in its downfall. I hadn't heard from him since that day in the gym when I exposed him for what he was. Hearing his voice now felt like a punch to the gut. What the hell do you want? I asked, my tone sharp. I know this is the last thing you want to hear, Trevor said, his voice surprisingly calm, but I need to talk to you. It's important. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You think I want to talk to you after everything that happened? I get it, he said quickly. I know I'm the last person you want to deal with, but it's about Sam. Sam, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't spoken to her in months. After our final conversation, I thought we had both moved on. But hearing her name again brought back a flood of memories, the good, the bad, and everything in between. What about her? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear Trevor take a deep breath. She's in trouble, Harry. I know we didn't leave things on good terms. Hell, that's an understatement, but I thought you should know. She's been going through some stuff. It's bad. I think she needs help. I didn't know how to respond. My first instinct was to hang up. After everything Sam had put me through, after everything I had been forced to endure because of her betrayal, why should I care what she was going through now? She had made her choices, and I had made mine. We had moved on, but something in Trevor's voice stopped me. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness like the last time I had spoken to him. He sounded worried, maybe even scared. What kind of trouble? I finally asked. She's been drinking a lot, Trevor admitted. I mean, really drinking. After everything that went down between us, she started spiraling. I tried to help her for a while, but it got worse. We haven't spoken in a while, but the last time I saw her, she wasn't in a good place. I know I messed up, Harry. I know I caused a lot of this. But I think you're the only person who can get through to her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sam, the woman who had always been so in control, was falling apart. The thought of her drinking herself into a downward spiral hit me harder than I expected. No matter what had happened between us, I had loved her once. A part of me still cared, even if I didn't want to admit it. But then again, why was this my problem? Why should I be the one to pick up the pieces? I don't know what you expect me to do, I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. I don't expect anything, Trevor replied. I just thought you should know. I've done enough damage. I don't deserve to be the one to help her, but maybe you can. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, to say that Sam's problems were no longer my concern. But another part of me, the part that had spent years loving her, couldn't just ignore it. After what felt like an eternity, I spoke again. Where is she? Trevor gave me her address, and I scribbled it down on a piece of paper, feeling a mix of dread and responsibility settle over me. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing by getting involved, but I knew I couldn't just turn my back on her completely. Not when she was in trouble. I'll check on her, I said finally, my voice tight. But this doesn't change anything between us. I understand, Trevor said, his voice filled with relief. Thank you, Harry. I mean that. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. The thought of seeing Sam again after everything that had happened was overwhelming. I didn't know what I was walking into, or if I was even the right person to help her. But I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, my heart pounding as I drove towards Sam's new apartment. It felt like I was diving headfirst back into the chaos I had worked so hard to escape. But this time, I wasn't going in blind. I was going in with my eyes wide open. And no matter what I found, I knew I had the strength to face it. Whatever Sam was going through, it wasn't my fault. But maybe, just maybe, I could help her find her way out. As I drove through the dark streets towards Sam's apartment, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The memories I'd been trying so hard to bury began to rise to the surface. The fights, the betrayal, the day I walked into that gym and exposed her affair to the world. It all came rushing back, clear as day. And now, here I was, driving toward the very woman who had shattered my life, about to walk right back into the chaos. Why was I doing this? Why did I still care? I didn't have answers. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the part of me that couldn't stand to see someone I had once loved spiral out of control. Maybe it was the closure I hadn't realized I still needed. Whatever the reason, I couldn't turn the car around. Not now. When I pulled up to Sam's apartment building, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the entrance. I wasn't ready for this. The thought of seeing her again, of walking back into the life I had left behind, made my chest tighten. But I had come this far, and I wasn't going to back out now. I climbed out of the car and made my way inside. The building was modest, a far cry from the home we had shared together, but it was clean and quiet. I found her apartment on the second floor and knocked lightly, not knowing what to expect. For a moment, there was no answer, and I wondered if she was even home. But then, I heard movement on the other side of the door. The lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for me to see her face. Sam looked different. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red and puffy. She was thinner than I remembered, and there was a tiredness to her that I hadn't seen before. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence stretching between us. "Harry?" Her voice was hoarse like she hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed, trying to push down the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. "Trevor called me." Her face darkened at the mention of his name, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Of course, he did. I guess he thinks you can save me now, huh?" "I don't know about that," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But I thought I should check on you." Sam opened the door wider and stepped back, allowing me inside. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, and cluttered with empty bottles and takeout containers. The smell of stale alcohol hung in the air, and I could see the remnants of her downward spiral in every corner of the room. She slumped down on the couch, running a hand through her messy hair. "You didn't have to come. I don't need saving, Harry." I stayed standing, not quite sure what to do with myself. "I didn't come to save you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." She let out another laugh, this one tinged with sadness. "Do I look okay to you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the tiny kitchen. Sam stared at the floor, avoiding my eyes, and I could see the weight of everything pressing down on her. This wasn't the woman I had once loved. This wasn't the confident, driven Sam who had been so sure of everything. This was someone who had lost herself. "I screwed up, Harry," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that. I ruined everything. And now I don't even know who I am anymore." Hearing her admit that, after all this time, hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long being angry at her, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. But seeing her like this, broken and lost, made it hard to hold on to that anger. "I'm not here to blame you," I said, my voice gentler now. I don't want to see you like this." Sam looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to be like this." I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to do? I wasn't a therapist, and I wasn't her husband anymore. I couldn't fix her, couldn't undo the choices she had made. But I also couldn't walk away, not when she was this far gone. "Have you talked to anyone? Gotten help?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. "I don't even know where to start. After everything that happened with you, with Trevor, I just couldn't face it. I couldn't face anyone." There was a long pause as she wiped at her eyes, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own regret. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I destroyed everything between us. And I hate myself for it. Every single day." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It wasn't all your fault, Sam. We were both falling apart long before Trevor came into the picture." She looked up at me, surprised by my words. "Do you really believe that?" "I do," I admitted. "But that doesn't change what happened. We can't go back. We can't fix it." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the old Sam. The one who cared, the one who had once been so full of life and love. But now, that spark was buried beneath layers of guilt and self-loathing. "What do I do, Harry?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How do I fix this?" I didn't have the answers. I wasn't sure anyone did. But I knew one thing, she couldn't do it alone. You need help, I said gently. Real help. This isn't something you can fix by yourself. Sam nodded, her face crumpling as the reality of her situation sank in. I don't even know where to start. I'll help you, I said, surprising even myself with the words. I'll help you get through this, but you have to want it, Sam. You have to want to change. She looked at me, a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. I do. I want to be better. I don't know if I can. You can, I said firmly. But you have to take that first step. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the past heavy between us. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in Sam in a long time, a will to fight. I'll try, she whispered. And with that, I knew this was just the beginning. For both of us, helping Sam was easier said than done. The days following our conversation were a blur of awkward phone calls, late-night texts, and uncomfortable visits to her apartment. She was trying, that much was clear, but the path forward felt uncertain. It wasn't just about getting her into some kind of program or talking her into seeing a therapist. It was about helping her rediscover who she was before everything went wrong. I wasn't sure I was the right person for the job. On the third day, I got a text from her. Can we meet for coffee? There's something I need to talk to you about. It wasn't unusual for her to reach out now, but the tone felt different this time. Something about it made me nervous. I texted back quickly, agreeing to meet her at a local cafe that afternoon. When I arrived, Sam was already sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of tea. She looked better, more put together than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was brushed, her clothes were clean, and there was a faint light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But there was also an edge of nervousness in the way she fidgeted with her cup. I slid into the chair across from her. Hey, she said, offering a weak smile. Thanks for coming. Of course. I glanced down at my coffee, trying to find the right words. How are you doing? She shrugged, eyes downcast. Better, I think. It's hard. I reached out to a therapist like we talked about. That's good, I said, genuinely relieved. That's a big step. I know. She took a deep breath, then finally looked me in the eyes. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about. There was something in her expression that made me tense up. I had no idea where this conversation was going, but I braced myself for the worst. What is it? She hesitated, biting her lip. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, between us, I mean. And I know I've said I'm sorry, but that's not enough. There's something else I need to say. I stayed quiet, waiting. I've realized that I didn't just hurt you by what I did with Trevor, she continued, her voice soft. I hurt you long before that. I wasn't present. I wasn't the partner you needed me to be. I was so focused on my own life, my career, and everything I wanted, that I lost sight of us. I know now that it wasn't just the affair that broke us, it was everything leading up to it. Hearing her say those words stirred something deep inside me. It was the truth I had been avoiding, the thing I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. Our marriage hadn't been perfect before Trevor. We had both been drifting apart for a long time, too caught up in our own worlds to notice the cracks forming. I wasn't perfect either, I admitted after a long pause. I should have said something. I should have fought harder for us, but I didn't. I just let it all slip away. Sam nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm not saying this to make excuses. I take full responsibility for what I did. But I think, for a long time, I blamed everything on the affair because it was easier than facing the truth. We were broken long before Trevor came into the picture. I nodded, understanding. Yeah, we were. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The anger, the resentment, the endless loop of what-ifs that had plagued me for so long, it all seemed to fade in the face of this new understanding. We had both played a role in the destruction of our marriage, and that was okay. It didn't excuse what had happened, but it helped me see the bigger picture. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sam said, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that I'm finally facing the truth. I'm finally taking responsibility for everything, not just the affair. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the person she used to be. The person I had fallen in love with years ago. She wasn't that person anymore, neither of us were, but there was something healing in acknowledging it. I forgive you, I said quietly, surprising even myself with the words. Sam's eyes widened, a tear slipping down her cheek. You do? Yeah, I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I think I need to. For both of us. We can't move forward if we're still holding onto the past. She wiped at her tears, her face a mixture of relief and disbelief. Thank you, Harry. I didn't expect that. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest ease. I don't know what the future looks like for either of us, but I know one thing. We both deserve to be happy. We both deserve to move on. Sam smiled through her tears. And for the first time in a long time, it felt genuine. Yeah, we do. The conversation shifted after that. We talked more about her therapy and about the steps she was taking to get better. She told me about some of the changes she was making in her life, cutting back on drinking, getting rid of toxic people, and trying to find her footing again. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined. As we finished our coffee, I realized that this was the closure I had been searching for all along. It wasn't about revenge or proving who was right or wrong. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and letting go. We walked out of the cafe together, the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden glow over the street. Sam turned to me before we parted ways, a soft smile on her face. Thank you, she said. For everything. I nodded. Take care of yourself, Sam. I will, she promised. And as I watched her walk away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The past was behind us now. And whatever the future held, I knew I was ready for it. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of clarity. Sam and I weren't in each other's lives anymore, not in the way we had been, but something had shifted after that conversation. I no longer felt the heavy burden of anger or resentment. It was as though that final conversation had closed a chapter I had struggled to let go of for far too long. With that closure came something else, freedom. I could finally see my life without the weight of the past dragging me down. I could look at the future without wondering what could have been. I could move forward, unburdened by the mistakes and regrets that had held me captive. I threw myself into work, keeping busy with projects and clients. I even started looking into some new business opportunities, things I hadn't allowed myself to consider before because I was too consumed by everything with Sam. It felt good to focus on something that was purely mine, something I could control and build without the shadow of the past looming over it. And then, there was Jessica. I hadn't seen her in a while, not since I got caught up in helping Sam. She had given me space when I needed it, and I appreciated that more than I could express. But now, with everything finally settling down, I found myself thinking about her again. About how easy things had felt when we were together, how natural our connection was. One evening, as I was sitting at home, I decided to call her. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment, unsure of whether it was the right time. But I had promised myself I would stop living in fear of what might happen. I had spent too long being cautious, holding back because of the mess with Sam. It was time to take a step forward. I dialed her number, and she picked up after the first ring. Hey, Jessica's voice came through the phone, warm and familiar. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I know, I said, a small smile forming on my lips. I've been dealing with some stuff. But I'm in a better place now. I was wondering if you'd want to grab dinner sometime. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, I worried she might say no. But then she laughed softly. I thought you'd never ask, she said, her tone teasing. Yeah, I'd love to. We made plans to meet the next evening at a cozy little restaurant downtown. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, excitement. Not the rushed, anxious energy I had felt when my life was spinning out of control, but a calm, steady sense of anticipation. The next evening, when I saw Jessica again, everything fell into place. She looked beautiful, as always, but it wasn't just her appearance that drew me in. It was the way she made me feel, grounded, seen, understood. Dinner was easy, and our conversation flowed naturally. We laughed and talked about our lives, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I could just be myself. At the end of the evening, as we walked down the quiet street outside the restaurant, I turned to her. I've missed this, I admitted, my voice low. I've missed you. Jessica smiled, her eyes softening. I've missed you too. I wasn't sure when you'd be ready, but I'm glad you are now. I am, I said, and I meant it. I want to see where this goes. I don't want to be held back by the past anymore. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. Neither do I. As we stood there, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't perfect, and there were still things to figure out. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on the right path. Over the next few weeks, things with Jessica continued to grow. It was different from what I had with Sam, simpler, less complicated. There was no underlying tension or unspoken resentment. We both knew what we wanted, and we were both ready to build something new together. Work continued to keep me busy, but this time, it didn't feel like an escape. It was just one part of my life, not the thing I used to drown out everything else. I was able to balance it with my relationship with Jessica, finding time for both without feeling stretched too thin. It was a new feeling for me, being able to handle things without them spiraling out of control. Sam, on the other hand, had taken a quieter role in my life. After that final conversation, we didn't stay in touch. It wasn't out of anger or avoidance, but simply because we had said everything we needed to say. I had helped her when she needed it, and now it was up to her to continue on her own path. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my office, I got an email from her. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough. "Hey Harry, I just wanted to let you know I've been going to therapy regularly, and things are getting better. I'm not perfect, and I've still got a long way to go, but I'm working on it. I just wanted to thank you again for being there when I needed it. I hope you're doing well. Sam." I stared at the email for a while, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. This was it, the final piece I needed to let go of. Sam was moving on, finding her way, and that was all I could have hoped for. I didn't need to respond. There was no need to reopen the conversation. It was enough to know she was okay. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, looking out the window. The city stretched out before me, alive and bustling, full of possibilities. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't haunted by what had happened. The future was wide open, and I was ready to step into it. That evening, Jessica and I went out for a walk in the park, the autumn air crisp and refreshing. We talked about everything and nothing, enjoying each other's company without the pressure of trying to fix anything or prove ourselves. It was just easy. At one point, we stopped by the lake, watching as the sun set over the water. Jessica slipped her hand into mine, and we stood there in comfortable silence, taking in the beauty of the moment. "I think this is the happiest I've been in a long time," I said quietly, breaking the silence. Jessica smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "Me too." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, I knew that this was just the beginning. My life had been turned upside down more than once, but now, for the first time, I was ready to move forward. No longer weighed down by the past, but looking ahead to whatever the future had in store. I was ready to live again. The next few months passed in a blur of new beginnings and fresh experiences. Jessica and I grew closer, finding comfort in the simplicity of our connection. There were no hidden agendas, no underlying guilt, just the two of us learning to build something real. One Saturday morning, we decided to go on a hike. Jessica loved the outdoors, and I was slowly growing fond of it too. There was something about being surrounded by nature, away from the noise and chaos of the city, that allowed me to clear my head. As we climbed higher, the path winding through trees that had begun to change color for the fall, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. Everything that had once felt chaotic, painful, and overwhelming now seemed so distant. I was no longer haunted by the choices I had made or the betrayals I had endured. I had finally found peace with all of it. Jessica glanced over her shoulder, smiling as she caught me deep in thought. "You okay back there?" she called, teasing. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "Just thinking." She slowed down, falling into step beside me. "Good thoughts, I hope?" "The best," I replied, feeling a warmth in my chest. It's funny, isn't it? How everything can feel like it's falling apart one minute, and the next, you're climbing a mountain with someone you care about. She laughed softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, reaching out to take her hand as we walked together. I wasn't sure I'd ever get to this point. Jessica looked at me thoughtfully, squeezing my hand gently. "But you did, and that's what matters." As we reached the top of the hill, we were greeted by a breathtaking view. Rolling hills stretching out as far as the eye could see, the sky a brilliant blue above us. It was the kind of moment that made you feel small and yet deeply connected to something larger than yourself. We stood there for a while, taking it all in. There was something about the quiet, the stillness of the moment, that made me realize how far I had come. The weight of the past no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it had become part of the foundation I stood on. I'm glad you're here with me, I said quietly, turning to Jessica. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it. Her eyes softened as she looked at me, her expression tender. I'm not going anywhere, she said, stepping closer and wrapping her arms around me. We'll figure it out together. And in that moment, I knew she meant it. There was no uncertainty in her words, no hesitation in her touch. She was steady, grounded, everything I had been searching for without even realizing it. As we made our way back down the mountain, I couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy, and there were moments when I wasn't sure I would make it through. But now, standing on the other side, I could see that every step, every painful moment, had led me to this place. In the end, it wasn't about the betrayal or the revenge, the anger or the guilt. It was about finding myself again. Learning to let go of the things that no longer served me and embracing the people and experiences that brought me joy. As we reached the base of the mountain, Jessica turned to me, her eyes sparkling with the light of 1,000 possibilities. What now? She asked, her tone playful. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally lift off my shoulders. Whatever we want, I said, knowing it was true. We had made it through the hardest parts. Now, it was time to live.